The lawyer's office was the color of weak tea. It smelled of old paper and the quiet desperation of lives being sorted into columns of assets and liabilities. Alara sat perfectly still on a leather chair that was too large for her, its cold surface a stark contrast to the cloying humidity of the July afternoon. She was 20 years old. Her father, Thomas, had been buried 3 days prior. The world felt muffled, as if she were listening to it through a thick wall of glass. Across the polished mahogany table sat her Aunt Carol and Uncle Robert. They were not family in any sense that mattered. They were her father's estranged sister and her husband, vultures who had circled from a distance during his illness and had now landed to pick the bones. Carol wore a floral dress that was too bright for the occasion, her face a mask of pinched, performative grief. Robert, a man whose body seemed assembled from soft, damp spheres, checked his watch. The lawyer, a man named Peters with a tired face and kind eyes, cleared his throat. "As you know," he began, his voice a dry rustle, "Thomas Harmon's will is quite straightforward." Robert leaned forward, the leather of his own chair groaning in protest. "Get to it, Peters. We have a long drive." Alara stared at a spot on the mahogany table where the light from the window pooled like spilled honey. She traced its edge with her eyes. Her father had loved wood. He would have known the name of this tree, where it grew, the right way to finish it to bring out its inner light. He would have hated this table. It was all surface, no soul. "The primary residence," Peters continued, looking at a document, "located at 142 Maple Drive, along with all its contents, is left to you, Carol, as his next of kin." Carol produced a small, theatrical sniffle. "My brother," she murmured, though her eyes were sharp, calculating. "The savings account, with a balance of $32,450, is also designated to you." Robert grunted, a sound of grim satisfaction. He had already spoken of selling the house, of liquidating everything. He used words like assets and market value to describe the sum of her father's life, a life that had ended in a small rented room filled with the smell of medicine and the quiet hum of an oxygen machine. Alara had been there for all of it. They had been there for none of it. She felt a familiar, hollow ache in her chest. It was the feeling of being erased. In the 2 years since her father's diagnosis, she had become his hands, his memory, his advocate. She had managed the bills, cooked the meals, held his hand when the pain was bad. Now, in this room, she was nothing, a ghost at her own life's dismantling. "And that," Robert said, pushing his chair back slightly, "should be everything." Peters held up a hand. "There is one final item." He looked over his spectacles, directly at Alara. It was the first time anyone had truly looked at her all morning. His gaze was heavy with something she couldn't name. Pity, perhaps, or apology. "A formality, really," the lawyer said, his voice softer now. "A piece of commercial property. Your father acquired it many years ago." Carol frowned. "What property? He never mentioned any business." "It's a barbershop," Peters explained, "in a town called Havenwood. Appraised, I'm afraid, at a nominal value. The back taxes nearly exceed its worth." He slid a single, rust-pitted iron key across the table. It stopped just short of Alara's hand. He was very specific. This was to be left to his daughter, Alara. A short, sharp laugh escaped Robert's lips. "A barbershop? In Havenwood? That place is a ghost town." He shook his head, a slow, condescending motion. "What's it worth, Peters? $100? "The last appraisal was $4, the lawyer said, his face impassive. "For the land value. The structure itself was deemed a liability." $4. The number hung in the air, absurd and insulting. Carol joined her husband's laughter, a brittle, ugly sound. "Oh, Thomas," she said, dabbing at a dry eye with a tissue. "Always the dreamer. Couldn't even fail in a profitable way." Robert picked up the key, his thick fingers fumbling with its strange shape. He held it up to the light, squinting as if inspecting a curious insect. "Well, Alara," he said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "Looks like you get your inheritance after all." He didn't hand her the key. He tossed it. It skittered across the polished wood and came to rest against her still, folded hands. The cold iron was a shock against her skin. It was heavy, real. She closed her fingers around it. The teeth were worn, the bow a simple, unadorned oval. It felt ancient. "Don't spend it all in one place," Robert chuckled as he and Carol stood to leave. They moved toward the door, their conversation already turning to real estate agents and escrow, their voices fading as they stepped out into the hallway, leaving Alara alone in the silent, tea-colored room. She was alone with the lawyer and the $4 key. She didn't look at Peters. She just stared at the iron in her palm. It was all she had left. A worthless key to a worthless building in a worthless town. It was, she thought, a perfect inheritance. A final, fitting joke from a life that had been stripped down to nothing. But as her fingers tightened around the metal, a different thought, small and quiet, surfaced from the depths of her grief. Her father had been specific. He had singled this out, for her. Why? The journey to Havenwood was a slow bleed from color to monochrome. The city's vibrant, chaotic sprawl gave way to sprawling, identical suburbs, which in turn dissolved into the frayed edges of forgotten farmland. The bus groaned and hissed, its engine a weary sigh against the rolling hills. Alara sat with her face pressed against the cool glass, her duffel bag on the seat beside her. The bag contained everything she owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book her father used to read to her, a toothbrush, and the $212 she had left in the world. And the key. The key was in her pocket, a hard, insistent pressure against her leg. She had left the small apartment she had shared with her father that morning. The new tenants were already moving in, their laughter echoing in the empty rooms. She hadn't said goodbye to anyone. There was no one to say goodbye to. The bus was mostly empty. An old man sleeping with his mouth open. A young mother trying to quiet a restless child. Alara watched the landscape slide by. Fields of corn, their tassels bleached gold by the sun. Dilapidated barns leaning into the earth, their spines broken. The sky was a vast, indifferent blue. Her father had never spoken of Havenwood, not once. In her memory, he was a man of the city, a carpenter who could coax beauty from wood in a cramped workshop filled with the scent of sawdust and shellac. Before the sickness, his hands were always moving, always creating. They were strong, calloused, gentle. Toward the end, they had become thin and pale, resting on the starched white sheets of the hospital bed. She closed her eyes, the image too sharp, too painful. She forced herself to think of the key. Why a barbershop? Her father had never cut hair in his life. He had built things: bookshelves, tables, cabinets that fit together with the seamless perfection of a puzzle. He saw the grain in a piece of wood, the secret life hidden within it. He was a quiet man, but his work spoke for him. The bus slowed, pulling off the main highway onto a cracked asphalt road. A faded sign announced, "Welcome to Havenwood. Population 412. The number seemed optimistic. The town square was a patch of sun-scorched grass with a dry fountain at its center. A handful of storefronts lined one side of the street, most of them dark and empty. A diner with a flickering neon sign, a post office, a hardware store. That was it. The bus hissed to a stop, its doors folding open with a pneumatic sigh. "Havenwood," the driver called out to the empty bus. Alara grabbed her bag and stepped down into the oppressive heat. The bus pulled away, its departure leaving a profound silence in its wake. The air was thick with the smell of hot asphalt and dry dust. She stood alone in the center of the dying town, her inheritance. She didn't need to ask for directions. She could see it from where she stood. At the far end of the short block, slumped between a boarded-up shoe store and the diner, was a narrow two-story building that looked like it was tired of standing. Harmon's Barbershop. The sign was barely there. The paint flaked away to reveal the ghost of the letters underneath. The single large window on the ground floor was opaque with grime. The clapboard siding, once white, was now a patchwork of gray, weathered wood and peeling paint. A single, pathetic-looking weed grew from a crack in the front step. It was worse than she had imagined. It was a ruin, a monument to failure. Her uncle's mocking laughter echoed in her ears. A liability. That's what the lawyer had called it. He was right. This wasn't a building. It was a weight, something to be torn down, not owned. Her shoulders slumped. The hope she hadn't even realized she was carrying, a tiny, fragile ember, flickered and died. This was a mistake. She should have thrown the key in the river. She should have stayed in the city, found a job, a room, anything but this. But she had nowhere else to go. With a deep breath that tasted of dust, she walked toward the building. Each step felt heavy. This was it. The final punchline to the cruel joke of the last few years. She stopped in front of the door. The wood was splintered and gray, but the doorknob was heavy brass, tarnished but solid. She pulled the iron key from her pocket. Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed it into the lock. It resisted, scraping against years of rust and neglect. She put her other hand over the first, using her shoulder to apply pressure, turning with all her weight. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, groaning crack, the lock gave way. She pushed the door open. It swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. That was the first strange thing. The air that washed over her was thick and musty, the smell of a place that had been sealed for a long time. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light that cut through the grimy window. But underneath the smell of decay, there was something else, a clean, sharp scent, cedar, and oil. She stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. The room was dark, but her eyes slowly adjusted. It was a small, narrow space. A single barber chair, its red leather cracked and torn, sat in the center of the room like a forgotten throne. Along one wall ran a long, wooden counter. A large, ornate mirror, its silvering clouded with age, hung behind it. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust and dirt, but as her eyes scanned the room, she started to see things. The floorboards. They weren't warped or buckled. Beneath the grime, she could see they were made of a dark, rich wood, laid in a precise herringbone pattern. No gaps, no uneven edges. Perfect. She walked over to the counter. It was a single, massive slab of walnut, its surface smooth and cool to the touch despite the filth. She ran her hand along its edge. The joinery where it met the wall was so tight, so flawless, it looked as if it had grown there. This was his work. She knew it with a certainty that cut through the fog of her grief. This was not the work of a failed businessman. This was the work of a master craftsman. She moved to the barber chair. It was an antique, heavy and chromed. The leather was ruined, but she pushed gently on the back, and the chair swiveled with a smooth, silent motion. She pressed the foot pedal, and with a soft hiss of air, the chair rose an inch. The hydraulics still worked. Her father had built this place. He hadn't just bought it. He had built it. The sagging exterior, the peeling paint, that was a mask, a disguise. Beneath the ruin there was something else, something solid, something beautiful. She looked around the dusty, silent room, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something other than loss. It was a flicker of warmth in the cold emptiness of her chest, a question, insistent and clear. What was he building? The first priority was light and cleaning. She had $200, a ruin, and a mystery. She needed buckets, sponges, soap, and something to scrape the grime off the window. She locked the heavy door behind her, the lock now turning smoothly, and walked back toward the town square. The hardware store was the only place that looked truly alive. Its windows were clean, displaying a neat arrangement of garden tools and paint cans. A bell chimed as she opened the door, and the cool air inside smelled of metal, sawdust, and oil, a scent so familiar it made her heart ache. An older man stood behind the counter, organizing a box of screws. He had a kind, weathered face, and wore a canvas apron dusted with sawdust. He looked up as she came in. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "I need some cleaning supplies," Alara said, her voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "Buckets, sponges, glass cleaner, something strong." The man nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He came out from behind the counter and led her down an aisle stacked high with boxes and cans. "Big project?" "Something like that," she said. She was holding the iron key in her hand, her fingers tracing its rough surface, a nervous habit. The man glanced down at her hand. He stopped. "Let me see that," he said, his voice suddenly different, sharper. She hesitated, then held out the key. He didn't take it. He just looked at it, his eyes narrowing. "I'll be," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That's Tom Harmon's key." Alara's breath caught in her throat. "You knew him?" "Knew him?" The man let out a soft laugh. "Of course I knew him. I'm Silas. Tom was a good friend." He looked from the key to her face, his expression softening. "You must be his girl, Alara." She could only nod, a lump forming in her throat. "He talked about you all the time," Silas said gently. "Said you had his eye for detail. Said you were smarter than he ever was." He looked back toward the front of the store, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Heard he passed. I'm real sorry for your loss. He was a good man. Quiet, but good." "Thank you," she whispered. "So you came for the shop," Silas said. It wasn't a question. Figured someone would, eventually. He put too much into it for it to just sit there. He gestured for her to follow him back to the counter. "Those relatives of his from the city, they came through here once, a few years back, sniffing around, asking what it was worth. I told them it was worth what a man puts into it. They didn't much like that answer." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Your father, he was a craftsman, the real thing. Not many like him anymore. When he first came to this town, people were wary. He kept to himself. But then old Mrs. Gable's roof started leaking. He was up there the next day, fixed it, didn't ask for a dime. My stockroom shelves were a mess. He came in one afternoon and built me a new set. Said the chaos offended his sensibilities." Silas chuckled at the memory. "He never took payment. Just a thank you, maybe a cup of coffee. Said he was paying a debt, though he never said to who." Alara listened, her heart swelling. This was her father, the man she knew, but a version she had never seen. A man with a place in a community. "That barbershop?" Silas shook his head. "It wasn't a business, not really. He knew this town was shrinking. He called it his project. A place he was building. For you, I think. He said everyone needs one good place that's theirs. A place that holds. A place that holds." The words resonated deep inside her. "So," Silas said, his tone shifting back to business, "you need supplies." He walked over to a shelf and started grabbing things. 2 heavy-duty buckets, a stack of sponges, bottles of vinegar and industrial-strength cleaner, a long-handled squeegee, a box of trash bags. He piled it all on the counter. "I only have about $200, Alara said, her hand going to her pocket. Silas waved her off. "Don't you worry about that." He pulled an old, dusty ledger from under the counter and flipped it open. He ran his finger down a page, then tapped it. "Harmon, Thomas." He looked at her. "Your father's credit is still good here. Has been for 15 years. You take what you need. Pay me back when you can." Tears pricked at Alara's eyes. She blinked them back, fiercely. It was the first act of real kindness she had received since her father died, an anchor in the swirling chaos of her life. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me," Silas said, loading her supplies into a cardboard box. "Thank your father. He was the kind of man who made you want to be better." He handed her the box. "Now go on. Put some light into that place. It's been dark for too long." Alara carried the box of supplies back to the shop, her steps lighter than before. The weight in her arms was a good weight, a weight of purpose. She spent the rest of the day cleaning. It was hard, filthy work. She started with the window. She filled a bucket with hot water from the diner next door. The owner, a woman named Martha with kind, tired eyes, had filled it without question, and mixed in the vinegar and cleaner. She scraped away years of accumulated grime, the black film coming off in thick sheets. Slowly, painstakingly, light began to fill the room. It wasn't the harsh, direct light of the street, but a soft, diffuse glow that made the dust motes sparkle like tiny diamonds. The light revealed the true character of the space, the deep, reddish-brown of the herringbone floor, the rich, dark grain of the walnut counter, the intricate carvings on the legs of the barber chair. Everything was covered in dust, but nothing was broken. Nothing was rotten. The house held. The phrase echoed in her mind. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor, she turned her attention to the mirror. It was huge, at least 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, framed in a dark, intricately carved wood that matched the chair. The glass was so clouded with tarnish and dust that it barely reflected her image, just a vague, ghostly silhouette. She sprayed the cleaner on a rag and began to wipe. As she worked, she noticed something odd. She could feel a faint, cool draft against the back of her hand. She pressed her palm against the wall on either side of the mirror. Nothing. The draft was coming from the mirror itself. She leaned closer, examining the frame. It was a masterpiece of woodworking, the carvings depicting winding vines and leaves. But it wasn't nailed to the wall. On the left side, she saw what looked like a faint line, a seam. She ran her fingers along it and realized it was a hinge. 3 of them, perfectly recessed into the wood, almost invisible. Her heart began to beat faster. She moved to the other side of the frame, her fingers tracing the elaborate carvings. Her father's words from Silas echoed in her mind. He said you had his eye for detail. She looked closer, her eyes scanning every leaf, every twist of vine. And then she saw it, a single, tiny carved leaf that was slightly different from the others. It was a fraction of an inch raised. With a trembling finger, she pressed it. There was a soft, satisfying click. A section of the frame popped open, revealing not a handle, but a small, recessed latch. She pulled it. The great mirror swung inward, silent as a whisper, revealing a dark, shallow space behind it. It wasn't a room. It was a compartment, barely a foot deep, cut into the thick wall. Inside, resting on a small, neatly built shelf, was a single object, a thick, leather-bound ledger. Her hands shook as she reached in and took it. The leather was supple and worn, the kind of object meant to be held, to be used. There was no title on the cover. She carried it over to the newly cleaned window, the last of the daylight falling across the floor. She sat down on the dusty floorboards, the ledger in her lap. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's. A strong, neat script, the letters precise and clear. The first entry was dated 15 years ago, June 12th. Bought the old shop today. The deed is clear. The foundation is solid. The rest is a mess, but a good mess, a starting point. The real work begins now. This is for you, Alara, a place for you to stand. Alara read the words again and again, her vision blurring. She hugged the book to her chest, the worn leather a tangible link to him. The dust, the decay, the years of silence, they all fell away. This wasn't an inheritance of ruin. It was an inheritance of purpose. This was a letter from her father, written across 15 years, and she had only just opened it. The journal became her Bible, her manual, her companion. Ilara spent the night on the floor of the shop, wrapped in a thin blanket she'd had in her duffel bag, reading by the glow of a cheap flashlight from Silas's store. The cat, a scruffy gray tabby with one torn ear, had appeared at the back door, meowing insistently. She had let him in, and he curled up at her feet as if he belonged there, his purr a small engine in the vast silence. Her father's voice rose from the pages, clear and steady. The journal was a meticulous record of his work, a conversation he had been having with himself, and with her, for years. July 3rd. Pulled up the old linoleum today. Found this beautiful oak underneath. A crime to cover it up. It will take weeks to sand and refinish, but it will be worth it. A thing isn't ruined just because it's been covered up. You just have to do the work to bring it back. September 21st. The main counter. Found the walnut slab at a mill 2 counties over. They said it was a reject because of a knot near the edge. The knot is the best part. It's where the story is. Hauled it back myself. It took 3 days to plane it smooth by hand. My arms ache, but it's a good ache. The ache of making something right. The entries were a litany of labor and love. He detailed the wiring he replaced, the plumbing he rerouted, the plaster he repaired. He included diagrams, measurements, lists of materials. It was a blueprint for how to build a life from the ground up. Woven between the practical notes were messages for her. May 10th. You turned 12 today. Your aunt sent a card with $5 in it. I hope one day you understand why I couldn't be there. It's not because I don't love you. I love you more than this wood, more than this work. Everything I am doing here, it's a prayer for your future, a place that can't be taken from you. August 2nd. Had a bad day. The loneliness of this place can be a heavy thing. I think about you. I imagine you here, running your hand over this counter. It helps. The work helps. Ilara read until the flashlight grew dim and her eyes burned. She felt a profound, aching connection to the man on the pages, a man she had known and yet not known at all. She had seen his weariness, his quiet sadness in his final years, but she had never seen this, the fierce, determined hope that had fueled him. When the sun rose, casting its first pale light through the clean window, Ilara knew what she had to do. The journal was not just a story, it was a set of instructions. Her father had started the work. It was up to her to finish it. She made a list, her own handwriting small and hesitant next to his confident script. 1. Water. 2. Power. 3. Clean and sand floors. 4. Repair plaster. 5. Find a place to sleep that isn't the floor. The list felt both impossibly long and absolutely necessary. She started with the water. According to the journal, her father had run new copper pipes, but had never connected them to the town's main line. He'd capped them off behind the small washroom at the back of the shop. She found the pipes exactly where he said they would be. The journal had a detailed diagram of the connection, but looking at the tangle of valves and fittings was overwhelming. She had no tools, no experience. That morning, as she swept the floor, a woman from the diner next door appeared at the open doorway. She was older, with a cloud of white hair and the same kind, tired eyes Ilara had seen yesterday. She held a plate covered with a napkin. "You must be Ilara," the woman said, her voice warm. "I'm Martha. I run the diner. I saw the light on all night. Figured you could use some breakfast." She handed Ilara the plate. It was heavy with scrambled eggs, bacon, and a massive biscuit. The smell made Ilara's stomach ache with hunger. "Silas told me you were here," Martha said, looking around the shop with an appreciative eye. You've done wonders with that window. I can't remember the last time I saw the sun in this place." "Thank you," Alara said, her mouth full of biscuit. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. "Your father, he used to come in for coffee every morning," Martha continued, her gaze distant. "Sat at the end of the counter, didn't say much, just nursed his cup and stared out the window. But he had a good heart. My boy, Jimmy, fell off his bike and broke his arm one summer. The medical bills were a lot. A week later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No note, just cash, enough to cover it. I always knew it was him." She smiled at Alara, a sad, sweet smile. "He'd be proud of you, child, finishing his work." She gestured to the back of the shop. "The cat got a name yet?" Alara looked at the gray tabby, who was now meticulously washing his face on the walnut counter. "I've just been calling him Cat." "Your father called him Sergeant," Martha said with a laugh, "because he was always on patrol." Sergeant, the name fit. He looked up as if hearing his name, then went back to his washing. He was home. Maybe she was, too. Alara showed Martha the plumbing problem. Martha studied the journal's diagram, then the pipes. "This is a job for Gus," she declared. "His wife had a baby last spring. Your father built them the most beautiful cradle you've ever seen. Gus is the best plumber in 3 counties. I'll send him over after lunch." True to her word, a lanky man in overalls named Gus appeared a few hours later. He looked at the pipes, looked at the journal, and nodded. Tom Harmon's work, of course. He went back to his truck and returned with a toolbox. In less than an hour, with a symphony of clangs and hisses, he had the water connected. He turned a valve, and Alara heard the magical sound of water rushing through the pipes. She turned the faucet on the small sink in the back room. Clear, cold water poured out. It felt like a miracle. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, her hand instinctively going to her pocket. Gus just shook his head. "The cradle your dad built, it's a family heirloom now. My daughter will give it to her daughter. You can't put a price on that. Call it even." He packed up his tools. "The electrical panel looks good. Tom overbuilt it, of course. Just needs the main breaker flipped at the pole. The electric company owes him a favor, too. I'll make the call." By that evening, she had lights. The single bare bulbs she screwed into the old fixtures cast a warm, steady glow, pushing the shadows into the corners. She stood in the center of the room, the water running, the lights on, Sergeant purring on the counter. It was progress, small but real. The days fell into a rhythm, the rhythm of work. Alara would wake with the sun, her body stiff from sleeping on the floor. Martha would leave a breakfast plate and a thermos of coffee on the back step. Alara would read a chapter of her father's journal. Then she would begin her task for the day. She learned to work. Her hands, soft and unused, quickly became calloused and sore. She learned the heft of a hammer, the bite of a saw. She followed her father's instructions, his voice a constant, reassuring presence in her mind. She tackled the plaster on the walls. The journal described the proper mix: lime, sand, and horsehair for strength. Silas had everything she needed. "Your dad bought this stuff years ago," he'd said, pulling dusty bags from a back corner of the stockroom. "Said he was saving it for the right time." Mixing the plaster was messy, difficult work. Applying it was an art. Her first few attempts were lumpy and uneven. She wanted to cry with frustration. She sat on the floor, covered in white dust, staring at the mess she'd made. She picked up the journal. October 5th. First coat is always the hardest. It's not about perfection. It's about building a foundation. Don't be afraid to scrape it off and start again. The wall will forgive you. The work will teach you. So she scraped it off, and she started again. And again. Slowly, her hands learned the right pressure, the right angle of the trowel. She learned to feel the plaster, to work with it instead of against it. She began to create a smooth, seamless surface. As she worked, the community quietly rallied around her. It was never a big event, just small, steady acts of grace. The electrician Gus had called, a man named Frank, came by and inspected the wiring, replacing a few frayed connections for free. "Your dad helped me rewire my barn after the storm of 2008, he said. "Never sent me a bill." A woman from the church brought a box of old curtains, freshly washed and ironed. "Thomas built the new pews," she explained. "Said a place of comfort should have comfortable seats." Silas dropped off a heavy-duty floor sander one afternoon. "Found it in the back. Belonged to your dad. He'd want you to have it." The work was transforming the shop, but it was also transforming her. The hollow ache in her chest was beginning to fill with something else: pride, purpose. Her grief for her father was still there, a deep, resonant hum beneath the surface of everything, but it was no longer just a void. It was intertwined with the smell of sawdust, the feel of the smooth plaster, the satisfaction of a joint fitted perfectly. She was not just mourning him, she was communing with him. She was finishing his prayer. One afternoon, she was wrestling with the massive floor sander, the machine bucking and roaring like a wild animal, when Silas appeared in the doorway. He watched her for a moment, a small smile on his face. "You handle that thing just like he did," he called over the noise. "All fight and no finesse." She shut the machine off, the sudden silence ringing in her ears. She was covered in sawdust, her hair tied back in a messy knot, sweat dripping down her face. She probably looked a mess. She felt wonderful. "He said I had his eye for detail," she said, wiping her brow with the back of a dusty hand. "He didn't say anything about his grace." Silas laughed. He didn't have any of that either, but he got the job done. He looked around the room, at the smooth white walls, the clean floorboards waiting for their final finish. "You've done good work, Alara. Really good work." His praise was like a balm. It was simple, honest, and earned. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his tone turning serious. "I'm getting old. My back isn't what it used to be. I could use some help around the store. Stocking shelves, making deliveries. It's not much, but it's 20 hours a week. Real pay." Alara stared at him. A job. A real job. A way to pay him back. To buy food. To start building something for herself beyond these four walls. She didn't know what to say. "You can work your hours around the work you're doing here," he said quickly. "I'm flexible. Just think about it." She didn't need to think about it. "I'll start tomorrow," she said. That night, as she prepared for another night on the floor, there was a knock on the back door. It was Martha, carrying a folded cot and a stack of clean blankets. "No daughter of Thomas Harmon is sleeping on the floor in my town," she said firmly. "This isn't much, but it's better than oak planks." Alara set up the cot in the small back room. She lay down on the soft mattress, pulling the clean, sun-dried blankets up to her chin. Sargent jumped up and curled into a ball at her feet. Through the open door, she could see the main room, bathed in the soft glow of a single light bulb. The walls were smooth. The floors were halfway sanded. The counter gleamed. It was starting to look like a real place, a place that could hold. She closed her eyes, the familiar ache of her muscles a comforting presence. For the first time since she had arrived in Havenwood, a broken girl with a worthless key, she felt something that felt dangerously like hope. If you've made it this far into Alara's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The weeks that followed were filled with the steady rhythm of work and the quiet hum of a life being built. Alara split her time between the hardware store and the barbershop. At the store, she learned the landscape of Silas's world, the precise names of screws and bolts, the different grades of sandpaper, the subtle art of mixing paint to the perfect shade. She stacked shelves, swept floors, and listened to the stories of the townspeople who came in. They all had a story about her father. He had fixed a porch swing for one, mended a fence for another. He had built a wheelchair ramp for the librarian, refusing any payment. He had been a quiet, steady current of kindness running through the town, and now that kindness was flowing back to her. In the afternoons and evenings, she returned to the shop. She finished sanding the floors, the heavy machine now feeling like an extension of her own body. She learned its rhythms, its temperament. When the last section was done, she swept away the fine dust and stood back, marveling at the wood. It was beautiful, the grain flowing in intricate patterns, the color deep and rich. She applied the finish, just as her father's journal instructed. 3 coats of tung oil, hand-rubbed into the wood. The work was slow, methodical, almost meditative. With each coat, the wood seemed to come more alive, its inner light shining through. The scent of the oil filled the small space, a clean, earthy smell that spoke of preservation and care. The shop was transformed. Light flooded the room, reflecting off the polished floor. The white walls were clean and bright. The walnut counter was a slash of dark, elegant beauty. Even the old barber chair, with its torn leather, looked noble in the clean, bright space. It was no longer a ruin. It was a sanctuary. One crisp autumn afternoon, as she was polishing the brass fittings on the door, a sleek, black car pulled up in front of the shop. It was so out of place in the quiet, dusty street that it looked like it had landed from another planet. Elara's stomach tightened. Her Uncle Robert got out of the driver's side. He wore a crisp suit and sunglasses, looking even more out of place than his car. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the barbershop. His mouth was a thin, hard line. He had taken off his sunglasses, and his eyes, small and piggy, scanned the new paint on the trim, the gleaming window, the polished brass of the doorknob. He looked from the shop to her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. "Well, well," he said, his voice a familiar, condescending drawl. "Look what the cat dragged in." Elara's hand, the one holding the polishing rag, stopped moving. She stood up straight, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She was no longer the silent, grieving girl in the lawyer's office. She was standing on her own ground she had sanded and sealed with her own hands. "What do you want, Robert?" she asked. Her voice was steady, calmer than she felt. He sauntered over, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel at the edge of the road. He peered through the window. "Quite the transformation," he said, a note of grudging admiration in his voice. He looked back at her. "Found a buyer, did you? Some rich idiot with a taste for rustic chic." "It's not for sale," Elara said. Robert laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Everything is for sale, sweetheart. I got a call from a contact in the county records office. Said there's been a lot of activity on this title, liens being cleared, back taxes paid." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You find something? Did the old man stash something in the walls? Money? Jewels?" The crudeness of it, the sheer, unadulterated greed, was breathtaking. He couldn't conceive of any other kind of value. "There's no money," she said. "Don't lie to me," he hissed, his jovial mask slipping. "You couldn't have done this on your own. You're a broke kid. Someone is backing you, which means this place is worth something. And as your father's legal next of kin, your aunt has a vested interest." "Carol has the house and the money," Elara said, her voice like ice. "This is mine. The will was very clear." "Wills can be complicated," Robert sneered. "They can be contested, especially when the benefactor wasn't of sound mind. A man who buys a worthless property and leaves it to a child? That sounds unstable to me. A good lawyer could have a field day with that." It was a threat, a greasy, pathetic threat, but a threat nonetheless. The old Elara would have shrunk from it. The old Elara would have been terrified. But the old Elara was gone. In her place was a woman who knew how to mix plaster and run a floor sander, a woman who had friends, a woman who had her father's journal. She took a step back and opened the door to the shop. "This property is not worthless," she said, her voice ringing with a confidence that surprised even her. "My father prepaid the taxes for 20 years through a town stewardship fund. The deed is ironclad, and it's in my name. He filed it himself the day he bought the place." She was quoting directly from a section in the journal she had found just last week, a section detailing every legal document, every transaction, complete with copies of the receipts. Robert stared at her, his jaw slack. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated her father. "This place has value," Alara continued, her voice growing stronger, "but not the kind of value you would ever understand. It's built on kindness and hard work, things you can't liquidate." From next door, the bell on the diner's door chimed. Martha came out, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood on her own stoop, her arms crossed, her expression fierce. Across the street, the door to the hardware store opened, and Silas stepped out. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching. Robert looked from Silas to Martha, then back to Alara. The trap was closing. He was an outsider here, an unwelcome predator in a territory that was fiercely protected. He tried one last time. "This is a family matter," he blustered, gesturing vaguely between himself and Alara. "No," Alara said, her voice quiet but absolute. "You and Carol stopped being family a long time ago. This is my home." She stepped inside the shop. "Now I have work to do. Please leave." She closed the door in his face. She didn't slam it. She closed it with a quiet, definite click. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood, her body trembling with adrenaline. She could hear him sputtering on the other side, then the sound of his car door slamming, and finally the squeal of tires as he sped away. She had done it. She had stood her ground. She had protected her father's legacy. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock. She opened it to find Martha, holding a steaming mug. "Figured you could use this," she said, handing Alara the mug of sweet, milky tea. "That was quite a show." "I was terrified," Alara admitted, her hands still shaking as she took the mug. "Courage isn't not being afraid," Martha said, her eyes twinkling. "It's being afraid and doing what's right anyway. Your father would be so proud." Alara took a sip of the tea, its warmth spreading through her. She looked around the beautiful, light-filled room she had brought back to life. She looked at the faces of her friends, her found family, watching over her from across the street. This place held, and so would she. Life settled into a new kind of normal. The confrontation with Robert, instead of unsettling her, had solidified her resolve. The barbershop was more than just a building. It was her fortress, her history, and her future, all in one. The town of Havenwood wrapped its quiet, sturdy arms around her. She was no longer a visitor. She was one of them, Tom Harmon's girl. Months passed. Autumn's crisp gold faded into the stark white of winter. A wood-burning stove, another of her father's long-ago purchases that Silas had been storing, was installed in the corner of the shop, its cheerful warmth pushing back the winter chill. The community continued to contribute in small ways. Someone dropped off a box of old records and a turntable. Someone else, a comfortable armchair that fit perfectly in the corner by the stove. The barbershop was slowly becoming a living room for the town. One snowy evening, long after Silas had closed the hardware store for the night, there was a hesitant knock on the barbershop door. Alara wasn't expecting anyone. Martha was home, the diner dark. She opened the door to find a young man standing on the step, shoulders hunched against the falling snow. He was tall and thin, with the same weak chin as his father, Robert, but his eyes were different. They were lost. He looked cold and miserable. It was her cousin, Leo. "Leo?" she said, surprised. "Hey, Alara," he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. He was holding a worn backpack. Can I come in for a minute?" She hesitated for only a second, then stepped back, holding the door open. He shuffled inside, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the gleaming floor, looking around the room in stunned silence. "Wow," he said softly. "My dad said you'd fixed it up, but this is—" He trailed off, unable to find the words. "What are you doing here, Leo?" Alara asked, her voice gentle but firm. He finally looked at her. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "They kicked me out," he said, his voice cracking. "My dad and we had a fight. A bad one. About money, of course. Always about money." He gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "He said I was a disappointment, said I had no ambition. He told me to get out." Alara didn't know what to say. She had never liked Leo, had always seen him as a weaker, sniveling version of his parents. But seeing him now, so adrift and broken, she felt a pang of something that wasn't quite pity, but close to it. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be," he said, shaking his head. "He was right. I am a disappointment." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw, painful honesty. "I was there, you know. That day in the lawyer's office. I heard what they did, what they said about Uncle Thomas, about you." He swallowed hard. "I didn't say anything. I just stood there, and I felt gross ever since." He gestured around the room. "And then my dad came back from his trip out here, ranting and raving about how you'd cheated him, how you'd built all this on some secret stash of money. But I knew it wasn't money. It was work. I saw your hands that day. You had blisters." Alara looked down at her hands. They were no longer blistered. They were strong, calloused, capable. They were a map of the last 6 months of her life. "I took a bus," Leo said. "Didn't know where else to go. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For them. For me. For everything." An apology. It was more than she had ever expected. It was more than she had ever needed, but hearing it now, it settled something deep inside her. "And," he added, his voice barely a whisper, "I was wondering if maybe I could help, just for a little while. I can sweep floors or something. I don't have any money, but I can work." He was asking for a chance, not for forgiveness, but for a chance to atone. It was a small, physical act, an offer to contribute to the work. She thought of her father's journal. A thing isn't ruined just because it's been covered up. You just have to do the work to bring it back. He was talking about the floorboards, but maybe he was talking about people too. Alara nodded toward the back room. "There's a cot. You can stay for a few days. The floors are finished, but I'm building some bookshelves for the corner. The wood needs sanding." Relief washed over Leo's face, so profound it was almost painful to watch. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick. "Yeah, I can do that. I can sand." The next morning, she showed him how to work the sandpaper with the grain of the wood, how to feel for the smooth finish with his fingertips. His hands were clumsy at first, but he was a patient, quiet worker. They worked in silence for hours, the only sound the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper on wood. It was a peaceful sound, the sound of something being made right. Leo stayed for a week. He sanded all the wood for the bookshelves. He helped her install them. He never spoke of his parents, and she never asked. On his last day, he swept the entire shop, his movements slow and careful. "I have to go," he told her, his backpack slung over his shoulder. "I have a friend in the next state, a place to land." He held out his hand. "Thank you, Alara." She shook his hand. "Be good, Leo." "I'll try," he said, and she believed him. As she watched him walk down the snowy street toward the bus stop, she felt a sense of closure. The last ghost of the lawyer's office had been laid to rest. That night, With the bookshelves finished and filled with the books the townspeople had donated, Ilara felt a deep sense of peace. The shop was almost complete. There was just one last mystery. She pulled out the journal. She had read it cover to cover a dozen times, but there was one entry that had always puzzled her. It was near the end, written only a few months before her father got sick. January 9th. The final piece is ready. The mechanism is delicate, but it works. A simple sequence, a child's tune. Just taps. It's important to remember the order. The room behind the mirror must be protected. It holds the whole truth. The room behind the mirror. She had always assumed he meant the shallow compartment where she'd found the journal. But that didn't feel right. It was a compartment, not a room. And what was this about a sequence? A child's tune? She walked over to the great mirror, its surface now clear and bright, reflecting the warm, cozy room. She ran her hand over the carved frame. A simple sequence. Just taps. A child's tune. She thought back to her childhood, to the songs her father used to hum while he worked. There was one he favored, a simple little melody he had made up for her. She could still hear it in her head. 5 simple notes. Her heart began to pound. She looked at the frame. It was divided into panels by the carved vines. She hummed the tune. Da-da, da-da-da. 5 notes. With a trembling finger, she tapped the frame, following the melody. She tapped a low panel for the first note, a higher one for the second. She followed the sequence, her finger moving across the wood. Tap, 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 tap. For a second, nothing happened. She felt a surge of disappointment. She had been foolish. And then she heard it. Not a click this time, but a series of soft, whirring sounds from deep within the wall. A low thud, as if a heavy bolt had been drawn back. The entire wall section, the great mirror and its heavy frame, swung slowly, silently inward. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. It revealed a dark opening. Not a compartment, a doorway. She reached for the light switch just inside the opening, a switch her father's journal had never mentioned, and flipped it on. She was not prepared for what she saw. It was a room, a full room, hidden behind the wall of the barbershop. And it was a workshop. It was her father's soul made manifest. The walls were lined with tools, hand planes of every size, their blades gleaming, chisels arranged in perfect, descending order, saws with teeth so sharp they looked hungry. They were not new tools. They were old, beautiful tools. Their wooden handles worn smooth with use, their steel polished to a high sheen. They were the tools of a master. In the center of the room stood a massive workbench, its surface a mosaic of scars and stains from 1,000 projects. And on the workbench, bathed in the warm glow of an overhead lamp, was a half-finished project. A child's rocking horse. Its body was beautifully carved, its head thrown back in a silent gallop, but it was still in pieces, waiting to be assembled. Ilara walked into the room, her hand trailing along the workbench. The air smelled sharply of cedar, linseed oil, and something else. The faint, clean scent of her father. She felt his presence here so strongly, it was as if he had just stepped out for a moment. This was his secret place, the place he came to do his real work, the work of his heart. And then she saw it. On the corner of the workbench, next to a neat stack of sandpaper, was a small cedar box. It was exquisitely made, with intricate dovetail joints and a polished brass latch. It had her name, Ilara, carved into the lid in her father's elegant script. With hands that felt clumsy and foreign, she lifted the latch and opened the box. It was not filled with money or jewels. It was filled with letters, dozens of them, tied in neat bundles with faded ribbon. The envelopes were thin, almost translucent with age. She picked up the one on top. The postmark was from 20 years ago. The address was her father's old apartment in the city. The letter had been returned to sender. The handwriting on the envelope was not his. It was a delicate, sloping script she had not seen in almost 2 decades. Her mother's. She sank onto the stool by the workbench, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Her mother had left when she was 3. Vanished. The story she had been told, the story her Aunt Carol had told her again and again, was that she had run off, that she couldn't handle being a wife and mother, that she had abandoned them. Alara had grown up with that story, a hard, bitter stone in the foundation of her life. She pulled the letter from the envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unfold the thin paper. "My dearest Thomas," the letter began. "I don't know if you'll ever get this. Carol said you don't want to hear from me, that you threw my last letter away without reading it. I don't believe her. I can't. The man I love would never do that. She is trying to poison us, Thomas. She told me you were drinking again, that you said I was a burden. She said you wanted me gone. I was so hurt, so confused. I went to my sister's to clear my head. But I'm not gone. I haven't abandoned you. I would never abandon you or our sweet Alara. Please, Thomas. Please call me. Don't let her do this to us. I love you. I love our daughter. I want to come home." Alara read the letter again and again. The words swam before her eyes. It was a lie, all of it. The story of her life was a lie, a cruel fiction authored by her aunt. She opened another letter and another. They told a desperate, heartbreaking story. Her mother, writing week after week, begging to speak to Thomas, begging to see her daughter, her letters growing more frantic, then more resigned as they continued to be returned, unopened. Her aunt and uncle, a pair of venomous gatekeepers, had stood between them, feeding lies to both sides, severing the connection with surgical cruelty. The last bundle of letters was different. The envelopes were newer. They were addressed not to Thomas, but to Alara. And they were not from her mother. They were from her father. "My dearest Alara," the first one began. It was dated 2 years ago, right after his diagnosis. "I found the letters today. Your mother's letters. They were in a box in the attic of the house, a box your Aunt Carol swore was just old tax records. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe a part of me always knew. The truth. It is a terrible, beautiful thing, Alara. Terrible for the years we have lost. Beautiful for the love it reveals. Your mother did not abandon us. We were driven apart by malice and greed. By the time I found these, by the time I learned the truth, I was already sick. And I could not find her. The last address I have is 10 years old, but I have to believe she is out there somewhere. I have lived with so much quiet grief. I thought it was for a love that was lost, but it was for a love that was stolen, and I was a fool for letting it happen, for believing the lies because it was easier than fighting. This place, this shop, was my penance, my attempt to build something true in a life that was founded on a lie. And now, it is for you. It is your inheritance, not the wood or the tools, but the truth that is hidden inside it, the truth of a mother who loved you fiercely, the truth of a father who failed you, but who loved you more than he could ever say. Don't let the anger consume you. It will eat you alive. Just build something good. That is the only revenge that matters. In the bottom of the box, beneath the last letter, was a single, folded piece of paper. It was a page torn from a phone book. A name was circled, Amelia Vance, an address in Oregon, and a final note from her father. This was her sister's last known address. It's a long shot, but it's all I have. Be brave, my Alara. The workshop was silent, save for the hum of the single light bulb and the frantic beating of Alara's own heart. The story of her life had been shattered and then reassembled in the space of an hour. The anger her father had warned against was there, a hot, bright flame. But beneath it was something else, a profound, world-altering sense of release. The hole inside her, the one shaped like an absent mother, was not a void of abandonment. It was a space filled with stolen love. She sat there for a long time, in her father's secret room, surrounded by the evidence of his love and his regret. The rocking horse, she realized now, was for the grandchild he would never know. The workshop was for the daughter he was trying to save. She picked up a piece of sandpaper from the workbench. She ran her thumb over its gritty surface. Just build something good. The next morning, she went to the post office. She bought a single, plain envelope and a stamp. She went back to the shop, sat at the gleaming walnut counter, and took out a piece of paper. She thought for a long time about what to write. A lifetime of anger and questions and sorrow swirled inside her. But she pushed them all away and wrote 5 simple sentences. My name is Alara Harmon. My father was Thomas Harmon. He passed away this summer. I am living at his shop in Havenwood. I found your letters. She folded the paper, slid it into the envelope, and wrote the name and address from the scrap of paper her father had left her. Amelia Vance, Oregon. She walked back to the post office and dropped the letter in the mail slot. The act was small, but it felt monumental. She was not demanding anything. She was not asking for anything. She was simply stating a fact. She was opening a door. Whether anyone would walk through it was not up to her. She had taken control of her own story. That was enough. The barbershop was finished. Not just repaired, but complete. It was a beautiful, peaceful space, filled with light and the scent of old wood and new beginnings. The front room, with its comfortable chairs and shelves of books, had become what it was always meant to be, a heart for the community. Martha's book club met there on Tuesdays. Silas displayed the delicate wooden birds carved by a man from the next town over. Kids came in after school to do their homework in the warm quiet. The secret workshop remained Alara's sanctuary. She had finished the rocking horse, assembling the pieces her father had so carefully carved. She sanded it and oiled it until it shone. It stood in the corner of the workshop, a silent testament to 3 generations of love, loss, and hope. She was learning to use her father's tools, her hands slowly gaining the confidence to shape the wood. She was building small things, a box, a picture frame. She was building a new life. Spring came to Havenwood, painting the hills in a riot of green. The sun felt warm on her face as she sat in the open doorway of the shop, watching the town wake up. Sergeant the cat lay stretched out in a patch of sunlight on the floor, purring contentedly. Alara felt a deep, quiet sense of peace. It wasn't the giddy feeling of victory. It was something deeper, more solid. It was the feeling of being rooted, of being home. She had not found a treasure map or a hidden fortune. She had found something far more valuable. She had found the truth. She had found her father. She had found herself. A month after she sent the letter, a reply came. A simple card with a picture of the Oregon coast on the front. The handwriting was the same delicate, sloping script from the old letters, but it was shakier now, aged by time. I am coming. That was all it said. Alara sat on the front step of the barbershop, the card in her hand, and watched the street. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't angry. She was just ready. The past was no longer a ghost haunting her. It was simply a story, and she was turning the page. A few days later, a dusty car she didn't recognize pulled into town and parked across the square. A woman got out. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, but Alara would have known her anywhere. She had her father's eyes. Her mother stood there for a long moment, just looking at the barber shop, at the girl sitting on the step. Then she started walking. Alara stood up. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just waited. She thought of her father, of Silas and Martha, of the town that had saved her. She thought of the solid floorboards beneath her feet, and the sturdy roof over her head. The house held. The work was good. Her mother stopped in front of her. They looked at each other, two strangers bound by a story of stolen time. There were a million things to say, a lifetime of questions to ask. But for now, only one thing mattered. Alara stepped back and held the door to the barbershop open. The door was open,